The approval of the minutes of October 28, 2024, and February 18, 2025 meeting. I move the approval of action item 1A. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I'll move the item. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? That item's approved. I would now like to address Section 2, the policy calendar. Policy item 2A is a resolution to approve the fiscal year 2026 City University of New York investment portfolio spending rate. To ensure compliance with the New York Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, the university must analyze the investment portfolio to determine the appropriate spending rate for the upcoming fiscal year. For fiscal year 2026, the university proposes a 4% spending rate based on the review of current economic conditions, portfolio performance, and need for distributions, coupled with the long-term preservation of the investment portfolio. Let me ask Senior Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer Sharif Suleiman to introduce the topic before handing it to Thomas Zhao, University Executive Treasurer, for a brief presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair.
5.0.
As you know, pursuant to CUNY's investment policy, we bring each spring a recommendation on the spending rate. So here we are. We've done our annual reviews with the 8 prudence factors in the New York Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. We've reviewed the most recent endowment student summaries for NACUBO, the National Association of College and University Business Officers, to understand our peers and the returns and the spending rates of our peers. We've reviewed our historical returns as well, as the investment policy statement states. And again, in light of our review, we're recommending a 4%, and Tom Zhao is going to go into a little bit more detail about that recommendation. And I also want to note that you'll see in that presentation that the year-to-date spend rate, as of now, is almost 1% higher than it was last year when we came to the board. And that was, of course, informed by a discussion that we had, of course, among committee members, and sort of management being intentional about reaching out to the campuses and working with them to pump up that spend rate. So without further ado, Tom Zhao to go through the presentation.
Thank you, Sharif. So as you all are here, we're doing this in conjunction, in compliance with the MIFA, the standards in which we have to, every year, go through this process to make sure that the amount of money that we're going to be appropriating from the endowment is appropriate and prudent. I'm just going to move this along. The 8 prudence factor. Obviously, I prepared a pretty long discussion, but I've brought this before you before. The main thing, I think, is really the current economic conditions, right? There's a lot of, when you look at the beige book of economic activities, it's pretty calm during the first quarter. But as you all know, April was, has turned into quite a storm. So it was the calm before the storm, to say it lightly. There's a lot of uncertainty on the economy. And certainly, even the beige book had indicated inflation was under control, was coming down. There was equilibrium between the labor demand and supply. But overall, just the last couple of weeks has really thrown the economy and the rest of inflation, everything else, into a tizzy. So for the most part, we are coming to you with the expectation that the spending rate that we are recommending is very prudent based on the factors that are considered.
And the spending rate last year was?
The spending rate last year was 4% as well. We're not looking to move the spending rate because of certainly, the idea here is that the rate that we are proposing is really for the long term. And it's not, look, market is going to move up and down. We have a very well diversified portfolio that is meant to really protect us on the downside with this uncertainty that's going on in the economy. So we are confident in terms of the rate that we're proposing to you, 4%. But even with that, the resolution includes a provision that allows us to come back in case something dramatic happens, so that the spending rate can be adjusted.
What timing, as far as if you had to come back?
So we are looking at, at the end of the month, when we look at the monthly performance, if the monthly performance drops 10%, so even if the market S&P goes down, our portfolio is diversified. It's not just the S&P 500 or the Russell 3000, right? We're able to weather the storm. Just like last time in fiscal year 22, when the market took a significant drop, and most portfolios were down in double digit, our portfolio was down 4-point-something%. So as you recall, in fiscal year 22, we weathered the storm, right? So we're looking at a drop of 10% in our portfolio to make sure that we take the time to come back to the board in a timely manner. Because the reason for the 1-month portfolio is really just to make sure that we address the issue quick enough, but also if the drop in the portfolio was big enough as well.
Makes sense.
Okay, any questions? Is there any particular criteria that you want to discuss further? If not, I'll just move on.
Oh, okay, Ned?
Well, I want to support this particularly. I think the one of the criteria involves the consequences of making it smaller on the organization at the time that we're in. And I think we may need funds to help deal with situations that we can't yet anticipate. And so I'm in favor of this, but I would like to ask that next year, when we consider this again, that this committee have a report on the prior year's actual prudent spending. In other words, how did we, if we were authorized to spend 4%, what is the evidence that we did spend 4%? And what did we spend it for? I know we don't have to spend it, but what is the evidence that we're spending it in compliance with the requirements of any requirements on our endowment? And furthermore, that we're aligning it with the goals of the university and our master plan. We are requiring, the audit committee is requiring a report to all of the related entities on their non-tax levy spending. And when you look at that report, you wonder if they're doing what we're doing in terms of the prudent spending process. But that being said, we're the one entity that's not getting that report. And I think we ought to, as this investment committee, have that kind of report to judge how this decision is being implemented.
The only, and correct me if I'm wrong, we approve something, and whether it is directly tied to the larger mission, it's executed on not a macro, but a micro level, because you've got spending in a number of different places by a number of different entities, most of which you don't control. As I said, some of which you do, a lot of which you don't. So, I mean,
Well, I think
and I think you can give us how money has been spent.
Yeah.
And where money has been spent now. Those numbers are there, and it shows us.
they're there for everybody but us. If you can show us the report, that would be good. I also think this is a discussion in the audit committee as to whether how we're implementing this. But I can show you the report that's got it for everybody but us.
Understand, when you say what us,
Yeah.
But CUNY investment.
This committee, the investment committee, the investment entity
Sure,
that
but
we
there's also-
supervise.
we're one of the few who's dealing with, say, other foundations and 501c3s that you don't control. So you can.
You can know what's happening. You don't want to not know.
But you know through audit. I mean, those are the mechanisms, and the other board committee that deals with foundations.
We're requiring that kind of reporting to the other related entities. I mean, Baruch's foundation is required to receive this audit from us. But guess which of the entities is not required to have the audit and is not getting the report? us. And I think we should get the report.
Us is the investment pool, not us
The pool.
as a committee.
I mean,
But we're the people that oversee it.
maybe I could just say a
Maybe
couple
just
things.
take a
One
shot at
is,
this.
so one is the investment pool, right, includes both unrestricted, restricted funds. Endowments are mostly restricted funds, right? So so a couple things. One is the investment pool is audited as part of our regular audit, right? The Grant Thornton audit, that's in the scope of the audit. Some of the investment pool is to Terry Thompson's point, some of the investors in the investment pool could be college foundations, could be associations, auxiliaries, these separately corporate entities, right? So they're also audited by their own auditors. And all of this, if there are unrestricted funds which are spent, these would be in the non-tax levy report that you're saying. So you would see them if a college had their auxiliary had money in the investment pool and it's unrestricted money. If they spend that money, that should be in that non-tax levy report as well.
Can we agree to strive for an informative report when we see this again next year that would tell us whether we actually did the 4% prudent spending and what we spent it on?
So I think here, Professor Bendon, what we have here on the slides are the categories that we have, which are in the investment policy statement. And we have the breakdown in terms of the percentages of what we spend it on. The prior slide, which we'll go to now, speaks to the actuals, in terms of spending rates. So if you want to go there, last year at this point, we're at 1.35%. When we presented, there was a discussion that ensued. Now, through the engagement that we've had with the campuses, the year-to-date spend is 2.21%, which is right about there with respect to where we ended in fiscal 2024. So the projection is that we'll be higher there. And again, the categories, which you saw on the pie chart slide, as delineated in the investment policy statement, breaks it into some key areas. Clearly, we are ahead in terms of the NACUBO comparisons when it comes to scholarships and fellowships, right? If what I think you're asking is we come with a little bit more detail in terms of those categories, in terms of what the items are that are being spent. If that is actually the request, then I'm sure we can do that. But clearly, it's in line with that, and those categories align with the university's strategic roadmap.
Okay. I would say particularly that is a useful chart. We see we're going to get closer to the 4%.
Yeah.
But I do think it would be useful to have a better sense as to how these funds are being actually spent.
Sure.
We'll talk. All right, let's see what can be put together that, as a matter of fact, why don't you talk to Professor Benton and let's try and fine tune
Sure.
some of the information.
Happy to.
All right?
As Sharif had mentioned, the engagement has really helped to drive up the spending at the college. And I'll get to the end, which is we're recommending 4%, staying the course.
Quick question. So far of the 4% that we'd like to get to, we're at 2 now. So inevitably, we will, hopefully, by the end, get to the projected 4% if the market holds, or if our projections hold where they're at now.
We believe we'll get closer to 4. 4 is some schools are at 4, but others may not be, simply because there are different criteria and different things that schools are, different levels of needs.
Different things that they're spending on.
Correct.
Sure.
Correct. And also, as the returns have gotten better, even though we are recommending a 4% spend, that 4% is off a higher base. So that amount is still higher as long as we can continue to have good returns. The same percentage will give us be able to support more students even with the same return.
Okay.
And we're also just trying to understand better in our engagement with the campuses about some of the funds, some of the restrictions that may be on them, and looking at inactive funds, right? Also looking at strategies where some colleges may be looking at working with donors to use current use funds, for example, that are essentially funds you can use in the short term while you allow the endowment to grow, right? So that's another example. So we're really trying to be intentional about drilling down on the particular reasons, and where appropriate, seeing if we can pump up the rate.
Okay, I mean, look, it was a major point last year in trying to get closer to the 4%, and, you know, congratulations to everybody on this, for talking to the campuses and pushing to get the numbers up, to get closer to that 4%. So we'd just like to, you know, say on that one, congratulations, and thank you for moving that along. And obviously, it is not an easy process because of how many entities are involved. But excellent, really well done. I want to say thank you on that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, basically then, I'd like to move the approval of policy item 2A. Do I have a second for that?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? You just had, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? All right, that item is approved. With no more items on the agenda, I move to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second? We are adjourned.